Welcome to the TA Disruptors podcast. I'm Robert Newry, co-founder and chief explorer at Arctic Shores, the task-based psychometric company that helps organisations uncover potential and see more in people. And this is our third series of the podcast, and I am focusing for this one on some of the big and bold ideas that TA leaders are adopting in order to deal with the fast-changing and ever-shifting world of talent acquisition. And speaking about TA leaders and bold TA leaders, I am very delighted and pleased to be welcoming Ellie Long, Global Head of Emerging Talent at Rolls-Royce. And if you'll excuse the pun, you have a Rolls-Royce pedigree in the early career space, having spent 5 years at the utility company E.ON before then joining Rolls-Royce, and a very impressive and rapid rise within the talent acquisition function at Rolls-Royce. You're also the winner of the Rising Star category at the Great British Business Women of the Year Awards, and a past finalist of the Early Careers Professional of the Year at the Target Job Awards. But the thing that really connects us is our mutual passion for how we support disadvantaged, particularly young disadvantaged people, to get jobs in the workplace, and specifically how we tackle the problem of social mobility, which continues to be a real problem and challenge in our society. And so it's a real delight to have somebody who shares that passion with me, and welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a delight to be here.
One of the things I wanted to start with really is, I talked earlier about, people TA leaders who are introducing bold ideas and challenging the status quo. And last year, there was a huge social media storm when John Lewis announced that for experienced hires, they were going to reveal their interview questions in advance. And you had all sorts of people speculating about what that actually meant, some of which was informed, most of which was not informed. And it left many people quite confused as to whether this was a good idea or a bad idea. But you were one of the people who clearly looked at this, thought about this, and said, actually, maybe this is something that I could do, or maybe you'd been thinking about it before John Lewis had gone about that. So would you just be able to share, what prompted you to go down this route of sharing much more information than we've ever previously shared, but particularly giving up interview questions in advance? From the traditional way that most people have done early careers.
Yeah, so I guess if I track back to one of Rolls-Royce's challenges, one of the great things about Rolls-Royce from an emerging talent early career perspective is we get a lot of applications, as you can probably imagine. One of our challenges and opportunities, I like to say, is actually how we do more with those applications when they come in to our funnel, and how do we support candidates better so actually it's not just the ones that maybe applied first, or it's not the ones that have got the most jazzy, shiniest, wonderfulest CVs, because normally they're not always the most diverse talent, and it kind of leads you back to the points of social mobility. So without going down the whole of that kind of train of thought, a lot of the work we've been doing over the past couple of years is around how do we level the playing field once people apply, and how do we, once we've got them into our funnel, because we all do all this great attraction work, and I see loads of other organisations doing it. We spend so much of our budget and energy on how we attract people to want to come and work for us, which I'm not saying isn't the right thing to do. But actually, we then don't focus on, once they're in our processes, how do we really set those young people up for success? And how do we really level the playing field? How do we remove the barriers that might be in place at certain points in a process that are disadvantaging certain groups of young people? Yeah. So we've been doing a lot of thought and a lot of, challenging ourselves, thinking and looking at our processes. So that's probably where some of it has stemmed from. One of the changes one of the adjustments that we made, we did a big piece around neurodiversity a couple of years ago. And through that, we started sharing more around our process with neurodiverse candidates.
Okay.
So one of the reasonable adjustments that we've offered for a long time has been for a neurodiverse candidate to have access to some of the questions or materials in advance, whether that be days or on the morning, depending on the individual.
So you'd already seen some good feedback.
Yeah.
You'd seen some improvements in terms of how relaxed they were or less anxious that they were.
Yeah.
So you already had some evidence that doing this is a helpful thing to do.
Yeah. And actually, it isn't all of a sudden giving someone an extreme unfair advantage, which I think is where some people's brains goes to. They think
that's right.
Almost all of a sudden, the person that had those questions is now going to do 10 times better than someone else.
Yes.
It's not like an exam. An interview shouldn't be like an exam. It's not like we're giving someone the answers. So I don't even think that's a comparison. I see people making that comparison. It's not a comparison you can make. And I honestly, and I say I wake up, I have a lot of these thoughts sometimes in the night or randomly at the weekend when you're doing something else. And you kind of play through the process and what can we do and what can we look at? And I get to a point where I go, well, why wouldn't we?
Yes.
And so I say...
It's such an interesting philosophy of like, why wouldn't we?
So a lot of the stuff I do with my team and a lot of the conversations I have with them, I go, well, let's start from the point of let's just do it.
Yes.
And then let's ask why we wouldn't do it rather than saying, well, why should we do something?
Yes.
So this is one of the many examples of some of the changes that we've made. I don't see it as that bold. I see it as common sense.
Well... And when you think about it and you describe it in its most logical and simplistic form, which is we're setting people up for success. To set them up for success, we want to level the playing field, and those people perhaps who haven't got private school education, haven't got family members who can give them interview practice and prep them for it, we need to support those people. And that seems blindingly obvious. Yeah. And yet it doesn't happen.
Yeah. And so you kind of get to that place and you go, okay, so how do we help them? It's not a test. It's not an exam.
Yes.
There isn't a right or wrong answer at the end of the day in an interview. Mm-hmm. And the young people that we assess and the way that we assess through our process is and we made some of these shifts a couple of years ago, we don't assess on technical capability. I'm trusting that through the A-levels that they've studied or the university degree they've got or the BTEC, whatever it is that they've got and that qualification, that they've got the level of technical knowledge that they need to come to Rolls-Royce. I can then teach them, not me personally, but we can teach them how a gas turbine works.
Yes.
Or whatever it is that they need to know from a technical capability to be able to do their job. What we can't teach them or what we want to unpick and explore with them as part of that process is who they are as people and what their values and behaviours are. And therefore, there isn't a right or wrong answer. It's not a test. It's not an exam. So why wouldn't we give them the information like you would if you're going into a meeting? You'd go in knowing at work what you were about to talk about or present or what the topic of conversation would be. So that's essentially what we're doing is we're setting them up for success by saying these are the things that we're going to be talking to you about. This is the information the assessor's going to have. So we've not only shared the interview questions and the assessment materials, we've also shared what our scoring matrix looks like. So we've shared essentially these are things we're assessing, and this is how they link to what we call at Rolls-Royce our behaviours. This is what a 1 to 6 rating scale looks like. Recruiters and the assessors will have what we call positive indicators and negative indicators, and this is what this looks like. So now start to have a think about the skills, the behaviours, the experiences, all the great things that make you you, how you can start to structure some of those answers, and then come in and have a conversation with us.
Yes.
And what you can't predict, and this is where people will say to us, well, what happens if that person comes in and sits there and reads a script at you?
Well, that's right. That's what they were saying, is that they're just going to go to ChatGPT,
type it
plug in the questions you've got, plus you've given a few tips in there. ChatGPT, tell me what I should say and how do I link it to the Rolls-Royce behaviours.
So we play that through. So that's exactly what I have at work. I say, okay, let's play that through. So that candidate comes in, they've memorised it perfectly, word for word. They've even turned it so it sounds conversational and it doesn't sound rehearsed. What's going to happen when you ask a follow-up question?
Well, that's right.
They're not going to get ChatGPT out. Yes. So they're either going to be able to continue the conversation. Well, do you know what? Brilliant, because they've shown that they can use AI and digital tools
to do the research.
Because that's actually a skill and something we should be embracing within our modern world. Yes. So do you know what? Tick, 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 tick. And then they've shown that they continue to hold a conversation and can continue to share their thoughts and ideas in real time in the moment. So brilliant, tick for that candidate. Or they crumble.
Yep.
And therefore, then you've got another type of route or conversation that you start to unpick with that candidate. And maybe that candidate is autistic and that's why they start to struggle. But you know what? We've trained our assessors in the right way to be able to then work with that candidate and understand. And we actually ask candidates now, one of the questions that assessors have got as kind of a prompted follow-up is, have you used ChatGPT to help prepare your answer? And how have you maybe used that? How have you used the questions that we've shared with you in advance to set you up for success as part of this interview? And what's that reflective piece? Because reflective learning and learning agility is massive.
It's huge.
So again, why are we not embracing that? To me, the whole thing is absolute common sense.
I know. It feels and particularly when you describe it like that. And I think one of the key things that you said is that it's not a test. And yet I think the heritage, and the reason why so few people have done this in the past, the heritage in early careers is that it is a test. There is a right or wrong answer. You have to weed people out by putting them under pressure, and only those that survive, almost like a sort of Squid Game scenario, are the ones that really deserve to get the job at XYZ organisation. And actually, if you flip it on its head and say, actually, what we're looking for, as you alluded to, is potential, and so we want to learn about that person, then that completely changes the purpose and the dynamic of an interview, of a recruitment process. And then it frees you and allows you then to say, I'll give you a few questions, because there isn't a right or a wrong answer on this, so you can see the things that we're going to look at. And I'd like to come back in a second to the scoring bit. But the really interesting bit is that you then have these supplementary questions. And that's what I think everybody missed on the sort of social media, let's just complain about something that we don't really understand, that you're setting people up for success, but you're not walking them through every single aspect of the process, because that would be pointless. You're then just turning out robots and all of this. But you are making them feel comfortable, and then you're allowing the skill, and that's perhaps where we have to go into now, the skill of the assessors and the scoring to then be able to move beyond just the initial answer that they give you.
Yeah. And I come back to again, we're an engineering company. I think about our history and where Rolls-Royce probably was years ago. We were probably up there with some of those early career employees, and I hear it where people say, it's so hard to get onto one of their processes. It's really rigorous, and I think it's rigorous in the right way, but actually I think it's super friendly and relaxed and chilled. But I go back to when I talk to candidates, and I really like it in my role that I'll still go and see some of them when they come in for their assessment days and just chat to them. And they used to say to me, I've not slept last night because I've been so nervous. And you can see some of them physically shaking. And I'm thinking, they're 16 years old.
They've never been exposed to
They
this
are
kind
children,
of thing. Yes.
Some of the young people that we're assessing. Why are we making this process feel like it should be something that is fearful? Whether they get the role or not, and we talk a lot about kind of moments that matter throughout the process. Even if they don't get the role, do you know what? I want them to have enjoyed the process and learned something from it, and actually thought, do you know what, that was great, and actually I've learned some skills. I've learned a bit about me. I know a bit more, so I can take that on to the next one. I don't want it to be this, I'm absolutely petrified, because no one's going to perform at their best when they're absolutely petrified.
You're absolutely right, and you're not coming into work absolutely petrified, and we know that anxiety reduces people's ability to show their best selves. One of the things, in terms of guidance on that, because I think you're right about how you set people up for success, but one of the things that I loved, and it was a real refreshing piece of going through your guidance on your website, was one of the questions, you want to know what people's hobbies are. And rather than the kind of traditional hobbies you'd associate with an engineering firm being listed, I saw baking. Makeup and beauty. Knitting. And I thought, this is fantastic. If you ever want to go left of field in terms of encouraging people from different backgrounds and thinking about transferable skills, that certainly triggers are very different. I've not seen anybody on any website talk about makeup and beauty for an engineering firm as being a transferable skill. So share with me too about that advice. And you're obviously encouraging people to be relaxed, but you're also, it seems, trying to help them bring their best self out.
Yeah, and I think there's a couple of bits in that. So again, I say if you looked at me at my desk, I'm a walking pink icon some days. There isn't a typical engineer, and I think some of it is breaking down the stereotypes of what we mean about engineering and particularly women in STEM. But if I look at what the hobbies are a lot of young people have these days and the interests, again, when we think of the social mobility lens or the diversity lens, not all of these young people are going off to do Duke of Edinburgh, or they're not all sitting at the weekend with their BMX bike tinkering and doing things, and therefore that leads to an engineering career. Do you know what? That's perfect. And if you've done those things, you've got great skills, and we absolutely still want to encourage young people to come and talk about that. But if you've got, and I don't want to just stereotype crafts to female, but purpose of the conversation, if you've got a young female who's really into, I don't know, knitting or sewing, and she's taught herself some of those skills, do you know what? Knitting is very similar to coding.
Which probably not many people have thought about.
No.
I mean, I think you're right. You just have to kind of just absorb that for a second.
Yeah.
Knitting is similar to coding. I love that.
Yeah. If you have taught yourself to bake, you've taught yourself to follow instructions.
Yes.
So do you know what, actually, in some of our practical fitter machinist type roles, you are following instructions. You are doing things with your hands. If you're doing, I don't know, sugar crafts, I see what some of them are doing, decorating cupcakes and all this kind of stuff.
Yes.
You can do very fiddly, complex things with your hands. So therefore, why can't you translate that to doing something with, I go back to the point of, I can teach you how to use a screwdriver and how the engine works. But actually, if you've got that interest there, how do we spark that? And that's been a journey with our assessors to help them see that in a broader perspective. But I want a young person to come in and be able to talk about those hobbies and interests and think. And the reason we call that out in those guides is for them, when they're doing the preparation, I don't want them to sit there thinking like, oh my gosh, well, because I don't fix my bike at the weekend, or because my dad's not a mechanic, or because I don't do X, Y, and Z.
Bike or
that means I now can't. I've got no examples that I can talk about. The other part for me is the transferable nature of some of the wider topics. So one of the things that we ask them to do as part of the assessment process, and again is shared as in the guide, is they prepare a presentation. It's phrased slightly differently for different programs, but essentially they take a topic that they are interested in, and we deliberately say this is not something you have studied at school. It's a topic that you are interested in, and you talk about how that is then given you skills, or it has given you insights into certain aspects of knowledge, whatever it might be, and how that links to Rolls-Royce. So I know one of the examples we give, because I'm a massive Taylor Swift fan, is the impact that Taylor Swift had on the UK economy.
Yes.
Do you know what? If a young person came in and spoke about that, how that's then sparks their interest in economics, and now they've applied to a finance apprenticeship or a commercial apprenticeship at Rolls-Royce, how brilliant that they are talking about something that they are passionate about, and why that is linked to their future studies or the topics that they're interested in. That is so much more interesting than getting them just to say, do you know what, come in and do a presentation and tell us about
your Duke of Edinburgh
or something to do with Rolls-Royce or a topic that you learn at school, because you're just going to get 10 presentations that are the same.
Yeah.
Whereas we see young people talking about Taylor Swift, we see them talking about the football club they're interested in. We had a young lad that came in that talked about how he'd learned the Rubik's Cube and about how the skills he learned from doing that and why that would make him a brilliant Rolls-Royce apprenticeship. They come in doing Pokemon trading cards, like the things that we see. All of a sudden you've got a young person talking about something that they're really passionate about.
Yeah.
Well, now they're more relaxed, now they're excited, now they're engaged, and now you can unpick what their values, behaviours and transferable skills are, which is going to make you then ultimately get the best talent that you want for your programmes.
I love all of that. And very, very different kind of thinking. And you referred to it earlier, that actually there's probably quite a few people in Rolls-Royce who would have raised eyebrows when you said you were going to do this. So how did you bring about that change there? Because that's the hardest bit on there. You can be passionate about it and you can sing from the hilltops about it, but if the rest of the organisation don't want to buy into it, or you haven't got support or whatever it might be, so how did you go about that?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of things. I think I'm very lucky that I do have some really great allies across our organisation, whether they be the people in kind of people type roles or inclusion roles, or actually out in kind of engineering roles. So I always say to people, work out who your allies are and how you can take them on some of the journey with this. But I'm also a real kind of like, just go for it, and what's the worst that's going to be? What's the worst that's going to happen? Do you know what? We might do something, and 1 year we go, this has gone horribly wrong.
Yeah.
But we don't work in life or death. So actually we can probably recover from it, and we can adapt as we go. But the best thing that's going to happen is that you're going to see some fantastic talent coming through. So I think it's about building relationships with the right people and the people that support you in these processes, whether that be assessors or people out in the business or whatever that kind of looks like in an organisation. But it's about, I think, leading with real purpose, real excitement, sharing the story and the vision, and going, do you know what, we're going to go for it and be bold. And I spend a lot of time saying to sometimes engineers, trust us, we're the experts in this world, and you hear their feedback and their concerns, and we don't change everything overnight. We've done some iterative changes in each year, but this, I absolutely didn't go around asking everyone's permission and buy-in and kind of seeking out. I kind of said, do you know what, we're doing it.
Yeah, we think it's the right thing to do.
We think it's the right thing to do.
You must have had a few naysayers around the organisation going, Ellie's gone off on a tangent.
She's gone one step too far. I think they're probably used to me by this point. I think, like you say, I think it's people's understanding. I think people, when you play it out and you say, hang on a second, actually we're giving them the right tools to come in and be prepared. So you as an assessor can have a better conversation with them. Yep. They then get it. So I think it's about how you share whatever it is you're trying to achieve. It's about how you share that in the right way, and get the right people involved. But I am very fortunate to work for an organisation where D&I is a real hot topic, and people are really behind it. And so again, linking it back to kind of levelling that playing field and supporting young people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, for example, again, really helps those that maybe can't relate to I'd help my kids prepare. So it helps kind of put it into context for them.
No, you're so right about that, because one of the things that I just found extraordinary over the last 10 years or so is that you've had lots of organisations all passionate about DE&I and putting stuff on their website. Anybody can apply. We want people from all backgrounds. And that all sounds nice. And then when they come into the recruitment process, they're not set up for success at all. And so it's all wasted. Yeah. That kind of messaging. So unless you really think it through, and I talk about the golden thread here, unless you really think it through from your attraction to how the recruitment process backs up, and I think levelling the playing field is such an important one. And it's very interesting when you take a lens on a process from a perspective of, are we levelling the playing field? Are we really making it fair? As opposed to, we just had a ton of people in and we've just got to find whatever way we can to sift that out, because we're inundated and we haven't got time to look at all the applications. And I think that's one of the interesting perspectives that you've given on this. Because one of the, just on this topic, because you shared a bit, the people will be skeptics about, if you give them the questions in advance, they'll use ChatGPT. Have you found AI has because you've set the guides up in the right way, or did you have to make some iterations from that in order to deal with the advent of ChatGPT and people wanting to turn up with a pre-scripted set of answers? Yeah,
so I think the fact that all of our questions we ask young people to draw on examples, and we've broadened those examples, like I say, so it's not just your Duke of Edinburgh's or your clubs or whatever. Actually, it could be, do you know what? It could be caring for a younger brother or sister or an elderly relative. I think that ChatGPT doesn't know you, so you have to make it personal. So I think there's a level of that in there. But we actively call out in some of the communications that we send and in the guide saying, if you're using ChatGPT, use it for a foundation, use it to gather some research as a tool, like you would anything else, like you'd Google something or you'd TikTok it or whatever young people do now when they research. Use that as a tool, and then we want to know about you. So put your spin on it. And I think doing it in that way, again, some of the kind of anecdotal, candid feedback we've had from candidates so far this year is they feel like they can come in and share themselves. So they don't feel like they need to try and get the perfect answer, because we're almost saying to them, well, we don't want a perfect answer. We want you to come in and be you. And I think so through actually sharing stuff, it's almost had the reverse effect. If they don't feel the need to go and use ChatGPT to feel polished, because they can see actually we're not looking for a polished person.
Yes.
And so it's kind of had that, which is an unintended, I guess, kind of consequence of this. I didn't quite think that it would kind of go that far. So yeah, that's been really interesting to see that.
And I think whenever you do something new and different, you were saying earlier, you kind of go through your mind all the ifs and whats and buts as to how it might work through, but you can't anticipate everything. What are the things that were sort of unintended or unexpected? Were there any other unexpected, either positive or negative, that you've had to kind of learn or iterate or change since introducing this?
I think we've had so much positive feedback actually from parents and teachers, which I'd never thought it was going to land badly with them. But I think particularly teachers and all the pressure they have around just trying to, I guess, support and teach young people the things they need to teach them, they found it really useful to help when they're guiding. And the guides don't just cover actually what happens at an assessment centre. We've got another one that's around kind of preparing to apply, and being really kind of clear around the application process and what you might expect from a virtual assessment versus a face-to-face assessment, because we've got different kind of assessments for different programmes, and they found that really useful in supporting young people. So that's been, again, a really nice kind of change and positive. I think the other thing is that I'm just seeing young people come in with a different mindset.
Okay.
And even really simple things. So we've called out that if you don't know what to wear to the assessment centre, wear your school uniform.
Oh, okay. So you don't have to think about it.
You don't have to, yeah. So we've said, you know what, wear your school uniform. So wear something that you feel comfortable in, or your school uniform or whatever. And we've given some examples. And all of a sudden we've seen young people turning up a lot in school uniforms or in... And honestly, they just feel more relaxed. They feel like they're kind of coming in and they can be themselves. And I just don't know why you wouldn't want to create that as an environment so that you can get the best out of people.
I am so in favour of giving that guidance to support young people. I've just done a couple of recent sessions with students in London and also in Leeds. And their biggest worry is what can they do, what can't they do, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, what does good look like as well, and actually a lot of the time you go to a lot of career sites and it's just you can practice the assessment, but that's not setting the context of it up.
Yeah.
And I think what's really impressive about your guide is that it is so thorough and so detailed that if you really want to know what you're going to experience, you can see it there. And if you want to prepare in the right way, you've got all the information that you need.
Yeah.
The one question that I imagine must also happen, though, is I did everything that you asked me to do in the guide, Ellie, but you still rejected me. So did that, I mean, that's partly a normal kind of challenge around this, but is, when you give so much information away and you think, hang on, but I've ticked all these boxes and I've still not got it. Did you have any challenges around that?
Do you know what? We've not had that yet, but we are mid recruitment cycle. So watch me go back to the office tomorrow. We'll have that exact question. I think we've put a lot of time and investment in the feedback that we give young people as well. So I mentioned earlier about what we kind of call moments that matter. So we did some work last year around designing our end-to-end process, not around a process and not around process efficiencies, and around what are the moments that matter to that individual that's coming through. So one of them was, do you know what, a moment that matters is when they get that pack and they instantly feel relaxed. So that's where some of this kind of work and thinking came from. But another moment that matters is the point where you ring them up and I say it's like the golden buzzer moment on Britain's Got Talent. You ring them and you tell them they've got onto the apprenticeship or the graduate programme. But another moment is the moment you might ring them and tell them they haven't.
Yes.
And we can't underestimate the impact of what that moment is. So we've put a lot of time and effort into going, well, wherever that moment falls in the process, whether it's pre-assessment centre, post-assessment centre, what is the experience that individual then has, and how do we support them? And so I would like to think, because of the great work that my team do through rejecting a candidate, and then sharing what other options there might be, what the next steps might look like, and how we might continue to engage them as part of wanting to come and work with Rolls-Royce. Hopefully we're setting them up for them success for another step, and therefore it's not it's a difficult conversation, but it's not a sad conversation, or it's not always a negative conversation in the way that it might traditionally have been.
Great. And I really like that idea of looking at your process and thinking about the moments that matter, because for a lot of time you applied for a job and you got zero feedback, let alone the moments that matter are all the way through. But it's interesting again taking that lens of what's it like for a candidate to go through this. The number of times I've heard people say, I make the application form as complicated and as long as possible, and if they can't be bothered to fill it in, then clearly they weren't that committed to the job. And it's when you hear that, you go, hang on, you're not looking at it through the lens of a student who is probably applying for 30 or 40 jobs, trying to study at the same time, usually in their final year, so they might have exams as well. And so reframing that to what's it like for them, I think again allows you to really challenge the way that we've done things in the past. Okay, so you're halfway through the campaign then. So you've had some good feedback from teachers. Yeah. I imagine you've had some good feedback from candidates too.
Yep.
But we don't quite know as to yet, because you've got to flow that through as to what kind of impact it's made on the quality of people, or you're starting to see actually we've seen an uptick now in diversity or the other things that you were trying to achieve?
Yeah, so I say the final big numbers will be things like your D&I numbers at the end of the campaign, and we've only gone live this week with some more of our apprenticeship programmes, so I think it's a little bit too early for me to see whether that's made some massive significant kind of impact. I'll also be really interested to see from a funnel perspective. So we talk a lot about actually have we got maybe more diverse candidates coming through from application to assessment because they've had more time to prepare, because they understand what we're looking for, and then actually have we seen more of them then be successful at assessment centre and kind of X, Y, and Z. So that'll be some of the stuff we unpick during the summer, and to see where we can make kind of further improvements. But I think on immediate effect, we've definitely not seen the calibre go down, and we've definitely not, what's kind of been shared with me anecdotally isn't worrying feedback. It's actually, do you know what, we've run an assessment centre and all 10 candidates that we saw we're going to offer to.
Yes.
And again, other people go to me like, oh my gosh, but why would you want that? But why wouldn't you want that?
You definitely would want
Why
that.
would you only want to get 2 from an assessment centre? Because it's going to cost you time and money to go and run another one.
Yes.
Trust me. So why not invest in, and this is where I come back to, don't worry about what your application number is. Don't focus on when we need to get loads and loads of applications so that we can then try and sift the best whatever out. And we want this 1 in 10 or all of these horrible stats that I hear banded around. Actually, if my application numbers go down, that doesn't worry me.
I know. It's just such a bizarre metric, isn't it?
Yeah, what I really want is to have young people coming into the process knowing what the behaviours are that Rolls-Royce look at. We talk about mindset skills now a lot, so we talk about how we're assessing for mindset skills, we're assessing for behavioural skills. Coming into our processes, knowing and understanding that about themselves, how they articulate that to us, and then whether we're an employer that they want to work for.
And one other way, I suppose, I don't know whether you track that, or is completion numbers too. Have you seen any change in people dropping out of the process this year compared to last year? Because that's another way of saying, are we encouraging people to feel more comfortable? Yeah, so
that's one of the metrics that we track. So I've not seen anything, again, nothing worrying or alarm. I would say no news is good news if they're not sharing stuff with me. And we're also starting to look at work readiness this year and how we could measure that. And so actually whether some of this early investment that we're doing right at the start of the process around behaviours and skills and young people understanding what that means at Rolls-Royce and in the context of Rolls-Royce, whether that then has an impact as part of our kind of onboarding process and through to induction and helping kind of set them up for success. So not quite there yet with what the measures look like and how we unpick it. But again, it's that continual journey. It's not as just breaking things down into processes, which for some reason sometimes we like to do in
we do
HR.
in engineering, and it's a normal way to look at things. But what I found so refreshing from your approach and what you've shared with us so far is that sometimes you do just have to experiment, and it may not go according to what you hope for. That doesn't necessarily mean it's been a failure or it's a bad thing to do. It just means it hasn't quite gone in the way that we wanted it to. And so what have we learnt from it? And I think a lot of the time, it's interesting, in the IT department, they get budgets to innovate and experiment. I have never come across a budget line in a TA budget that says, permission to experiment, here's £10,000. You really have to say, actually, I'm comfortable with doing this, but we've not normally been allowed to do that in TA. Why do you think that's the case? I mean, it seems to me that you're happy to change the status quo, but there's lots of people who worry about doing that. So if you've got any tips or advice, or why do you think that might be holding people back?
I think people worry about the quality of candidate.
Yeah.
And that's what I hear quite a lot. And they also think Rolls-Royce has got absolutely massive budgets. And I can tell you now, creating an interview guide and putting on your careers website, A, does not cost a lot of money, and B, we do not have massive budgets to do this kind of thing. But yeah, I think people really worry about the kind of the quality of the candidate and how we build the most rigorous process, because all of a sudden we've got the business who are our customer in this, if we kind of get really black and white about it, and we've got to deliver this quality candidate to them. And that's kind of what we get marked on. Again, another kind of shift that we've made at Rolls-Royce in the wider kind of emerging talent context is we own that process end to end. So my role now goes right through to the point that person finishes the program. So when we talk and we map about experience,
not just the
I don't wave them off at that.
Piece.
No.
You're not chucking it over the wall to somebody else.
Do you know what? And I think that's what it is. We sometimes think in TA, like, we've got to hand this quality candidate over on day one. So I think that's another shift, is whether you can make that change in your organisation, or if you can't, how do you better create that line of thread all the way through to the end point? But we talk to the business now about, actually, we're going to deliver you someone who has got our enterprise skills, they've got the right mindset skills, the right behaviour skills. And so trust yourself in creating a process to deliver that. And don't get really fixated on an engineer or an IT person or a finance person, whoever it is, kind of like marking your homework on this really perfectly like qualified young person that you're going to hand over, because you're not. That's the point of them going on a development program, is to develop those skills or behaviours or get that qualification, whatever it is. I would say you're going on an apprenticeship, you're going to gain the technical skills that you want. What we're looking for is a young person coming who's got the excitement and the passion and the energy and the learning agility, and can act as a change agent, and is going to kind of drive all the softer human skills that we're looking for at Rolls-Royce. So I think it's kind of giving yourself permission to reframe what your service is as a HR, TA, L&D person, whatever it is. Actually, do you know what? You're an expert. So create a process that you're really comfortable with to deliver your end-to-end early career emerging talent journey.
It's a brilliant piece of advice too, because if you summarise that bit, what ultimately you're saying is, let's have confidence in yourself that you are the expert. And you alluded to that earlier too when talking to the hiring manager, saying, trust me, this is my space. This is how I know how to do this. And I'll explain to you why this will benefit you, but you have to trust me. And to some extent, then you need that self-confidence that I can do this, and it may not work perfectly, but it will be better. I've got to be on this journey to make something better. And if you're not trying to make it better, then you end up in the status quo, and nobody wants that, particularly with the skills shortage that we've got now. My final question is, I saw that your title has changed to emerging talent.
It has.
And this is a very interesting idea, Ellie, isn't it? That we're no longer early careers now.
Yeah.
We're thinking about solving the skills crisis in a different way. So just tell me how you ended up at something you initiated, but what does emerging talent mean?
Yeah, so I'll try and do this in a nutshell rather than a long-winded answer. But essentially, emerging talent is broader than just early career. So I always say to people, because again, you can kind of see the allergic reaction that everyone had at Rolls-Royce. Oh my gosh, we don't do graduates and apprentices anymore. Like, no. That's a massive part of what we mean by emerging talent. But emerging talent is about focusing on the skills that we need as an organisation for the future. So it drives two levers. It drives D&I and how we get more diverse talent into our organisation, but it also drives the skills that we need for the future. And it's a long-term lever. This isn't about, oh, well, I've got a really short-term skills gap now, so I'm going to drop in an apprenticeship. It's about what are the long-term skills that we want to bring in, and how do we do that through hiring diverse and developing diverse talent. And that might be graduate and apprenticeship talent, but actually that might be other types
Well, that's
of
right.
talent.
It could be people from alternative pathways that you're just
And that's what
bringing
we
in.
say.
You can teach them the skills.
So the second you flip that mindset, all of a sudden you lose what we put up in our world as a weird barrier that we go, okay, well, when we talk about graduates and apprentices, all of a sudden they've got to have left school at a certain age, or they've got to have finished university at a certain age, and they've got to have a piece of paper with a qualification on, which is very important for some roles and is the next kind of natural step for some roles. But actually, it's not about that. It's about us finding the people that have got the right skills, or have got the learning agility to develop their skills in a certain way, or maybe they've got the right behaviours or the right values. And therefore, how do we have a wider talent pool of people? So in a nutshell, emerging talent is about capturing people who are early in their stages of career or industry, and have got the right skills, behaviours, values to want to come and work at Rolls-Royce. That ultimately is graduates and apprentices, but also absolutely captures career changers, alumni,
Yes.
I say veterans, people that maybe haven't actually been to work. Do you know what? They left school at 18, they had their family young, and now they want to have their time, but they've not really got those formal qualifications. It could be, I keep using this example, but a young person who left school, they've got their GCSEs or whatever, they've kind of gone and worked in the local supermarket, maybe they've worked their way up, now they're a store manager. Do you know what? That person has got some fantastic skills.
Yep.
Why couldn't they come into Rolls-Royce, and why couldn't we support them in gaining the technical skills? And that's why I talk about it in these kind of buckets. They've got their mindset skills, they've got their behavioural skills. We can then give them on a formalised programme the technical skills for them to go and fly and do what it is that we kind of need to do. So emerging talent hasn't got the same restraints I think that early career has around an exit point of education.
Absolutely. And what I think is so exciting about that development, for the last couple of years, I've been a strong advocate that people who've been running early careers programs really understand about how you hire for potential and you develop potential. And in a world where the skills are rapidly changing, we know in many sectors there is a skills shortage. You can't just do it through graduates and apprentices. Yeah. You're going to have to find people from other careers, returners, and it's so exciting to see organisations like Rolls-Royce. We've been doing some work with Siemens and Molson Coors as well, where Siemens ended up, similar to kind of your story, hiring for a project engineer, somebody who came from Aldi, and this was, you know, a lady who had all the right skills or transferable skills to learn what she was going to need to be a project manager and engineer at Siemens, and it was just a question of putting her into that emerging talent training program, even though she had some experience in another sector. But that you know, the way to deal with social mobility is to really encourage our recruitment processes to be open to people from alternative pathways, alternative career paths. You know, Molson Coors were hard for a technical supervisor, somebody who'd been a carer, but been looking after, and then was just coming back into work, like you were saying. there's so many great people out there that are being overlooked unless we take a different approach.
Yeah, and I bet we all know someone in our lives who will say, oh, well, I made it up the hard way because I don't have a degree, or I left school, or whatever.
Yes.
And we will all know someone we can name, and we'll probably look at that person and go, but you know what? They're absolutely amazing at their job.
Yeah.
I then look at that job, or I look at some of those mid-career experience high roles that we would attract for at Rolls-Royce, and they can't apply because we've said you need a degree or you need X years of experience or whatever. But you look at the job and you look at the person in your head that you know somewhere else, and you think, oh, but so-and-so, my friend, or whatever, my brother, or we'd be brilliant in that role. Yeah. That's essentially what it is that we're doing. So we're not stopping the experience hire. We still need experienced engineers or commercial officers or whatever it kind of is. But where we've got skill shortages, why are we not tapping into a different route of bringing in talent? And I think that is the only way, we're going to kind of fix the skill shortages and challenges that we're going to see the kind of the future. But it's the only way I think we're going to really shift to a skills-based organisation, and an organisation that's got kind of this accelerated approach to how we move talent and move skills around, because we're going to create people that can learn different skills and have that learning agility and that kind of mindset that we need. So we're experimenting with it at the moment, and again, learning absolutely as we go. Not the only company that's doing it, but 100% I think is the way forward, and what is needed.
Well, long may all the good things that you're doing last, Ellie, because they are going to make a huge difference. And one of the things that I've learned over the years, that change only comes about because bold people are prepared to challenge the status quo, do something a bit different, and take that chance, albeit carefully thought through. And then, sure enough, the world doesn't collapse, the sky doesn't fall in, and we move forward. And so the work that you've been doing and what you've just described here is just fantastic in terms of changing mindsets. And when a company like Rolls-Royce is doing that, then the rest of the world is going to start to listen and hopefully change. It's been great talking to you, Ellie. Thank you so much.
That's all right.
To the podcast.
Thank you for having me.